Elliot walked into his country home late on a Wednesday morning, the first time he'd been there since Sunday. He wasn't planning to stay long, only intending to grab a few essentials before leaving again. Expecting his wife, Laura, to be at work, he made his way into the kitchen, seeking a quick cup of coffee. But as he stepped inside, he froze. On the table lay the handcuffs and strip of duct tape he had left behind. The kitchen towel he'd discarded after wiping his face was still draped over a chair. The video camera was mounted on its tripod exactly where it had been last Sunday, and the chair he had knocked over remained sprawled on the floor. He abandoned the idea of coffee and instead opened the refrigerator, pulling out a bottle of Diet Coke. As he took a sip, Laura's voice cut through the silence. "Where the hell have you been?" she demanded, stepping into the kitchen, her tone sharp with anger. Elliot didn't answer. His eyes were vacant, his expression hollow. Without sparing her a glance, he brushed past her and headed to the bedroom to collect his things. Laura wasn't ready to let the matter drop. She stormed after him, grabbing his arm to stop him. "I asked you a question," she said, her voice rising. Elliot paused, turning to face her. His eyes were dull, lifeless. "Let me go," he said softly. Reluctantly, Laura released her grip, watching him walk away. Frustration simmered within her. Turning back to the kitchen, she swept up the handcuffs, duct tape, and towel, tossing them into the trash can with a resolute clatter. She unscrewed the video camera from its tripod, setting it aside on the table, and folded the tripod before placing it neatly in a corner. When she entered the bedroom, Elliot was methodically packing a suitcase. "What are you doing?" she asked, her tone accusatory. "I'm packing," he replied flatly, not looking up. "Another business trip," she sneered, her voice laced with disdain. "No," he said simply. "Then where are you going?" she pressed. Elliot stopped and turned to face her, his face unreadable. "What does it matter?" "It matters because I'm your wife." "I have a right to know," Laura shot back, her frustration mounting. Elliot's expression didn't change, but his words cut deep. "You gave up that right last Sunday afternoon." The room went silent except for the sound of Elliot's movements as he zipped his suitcase shut and carried it to the living room. He placed it by the door, then made his way to the study. Laura trailed him, her mind racing. In the study, Elliot gathered some papers from his desk, sliding them into his briefcase. He packed his laptop and charger into a computer bag, then returned to the kitchen. Picking up the video camera, he opened it and saw the SD card still in place. "Is this what you recorded on Sunday?" he asked, his voice devoid of emotion. Laura smiled faintly, her tone almost mocking. "A souvenir of your payback." "Very thoughtful, thank you." Elliot's expression remained impassive. "Damn it, Elliot, talk to me," Laura shouted, her frustration boiling over. For the first time, his mask cracked. His voice, low and weary, finally broke the tension. "What have you done to me? Why are you leaving?" she demanded, desperate now. "Sit at the table with me," Elliot replied quietly. He retrieved his laptop from the computer bag and set it on the table, gesturing for her to join him. Laura hesitated, then sat down. Inserting the SD card, he opened a video file. "Let's have a look at this. Then we'll talk," he said. The footage began to play. The video showed the kitchen table on the left and a chair on the right. The camera panned as Laura's voice came through. "Welcome home, baby. Come into the kitchen. I've got a surprise for you, just like I promised on the phone." Elliot appeared on screen, smiling warmly. Laura, wearing a short, silky robe, walked up to him. Her makeup was flawless, her hair perfectly styled. She was barefoot, holding a pair of handcuffs. "Sit down in the chair," she said sweetly. Elliot complied, grinning. Laura moved behind him, securing one wrist in the cuff, threading the chain through the chair's back, and locking his other wrist. Then she stepped out of the frame, returning moments later with a strip of duct tape. She placed it over his mouth, her smile never wavering. Laura dropped her robe to the floor, revealing she wore nothing beneath it. "Are you ready for your surprise?" she asked playfully. Elliot's on-screen expression shifted from eager to stunned as a man entered the frame, wearing Elliot's robe. "Evan, from my work," Laura said casually, walking over to the man. She untied the belt of his robe, letting it drop to reveal he was naked. Elliot stopped the video, his hands trembling as he turned to face Laura. His voice, barely above a whisper, carried a devastating weight. "Why?" "You know exactly why," Laura replied coolly. "I don't," he said, his voice cold now. Laura's expression hardened. "Before we got married, I told you, if you ever cheated on me, I'd get even. I'd sleep with you in front of you. And I kept my promise." Elliot's disbelief was palpable. "You think I cheated on you?" "I know you did," she snapped. "Based on what?" "When?" he demanded, his frustration boiling over. Laura's voice was steady. "Jill told me. She said you and Jerry spent all last week with 2 women in bed." Elliot shook his head, his disbelief turning to anger. "And you believed her?" "Without proof." "I didn't need proof," Laura retorted. Elliot exhaled sharply. "Jerry wasn't even there. He got fired months ago. I was at a conference, and the entire week was recorded. I have witnesses. I never left the hotel." Laura stared at him, her face unreadable. Elliot picked up his suitcase. "You humiliated me, Laura. I'll be in touch. Through my attorney." He walked out without looking back. Elliot stepped out of his home and into the cold air of reality, his resolve unwavering as he walked away. He drove to his hotel, where he carefully burned the video onto 3 DVDs, each a testament to the betrayal he had endured. His heart weighed heavy, but his mind remained focused on what had to be done. At the attorney's office, Elliot explained his situation with a calm yet determined demeanor. The lawyer listened intently as Elliot handed over one of the DVDs. The prenuptial agreement they had signed years ago would hold firm, bolstered by the irrefutable evidence on the video. Discussions shifted to financial matters, and Elliot acted swiftly, ensuring every detail was addressed before leaving the office. Back at his hotel, Elliot silenced his phone, needing space from the incessant calls he anticipated. After a few hours of quiet, the first voicemail from Laura came through, her voice fraught with panic. "Oh my God, Elliot. I finally spoke to Jill. She was drunk. Please, call me. I made a mistake. Please." Her words rang hollow in his ears. He deleted the voicemail without hesitation, then methodically erased every subsequent call, text, and email. As expected, Laura's family soon began to reach out, their attempts to intervene relentless. When her father, Derek, called, Elliot answered, maintaining his composure. "Elliot," Derek's voice was filled with barely contained anger. "What the hell did you do to my daughter?" "I didn't do anything to her, Derek, except ignore her calls," Elliot replied calmly. "She's hysterical. What's going on?" "Talk to Laura," Elliot said firmly. "I'm talking to you." Derek snapped. "Did you sleep with someone or something? Tell me." Elliot's tone remained steady. "If you want answers, Derek, you'll have to get them from Laura. I won't discuss this with you." Derek's voice grew more threatening. "You son of a... If I could get my hands on you, I'd..." "Goodbye, Derek." Elliot ended the call and let the phone ring when Derek called back. He did the same with subsequent calls from Laura's mother and sister, erasing every voicemail they left. By Thursday morning, Elliot was ready for the next step. He purchased a new phone, sharing the number only with close contacts, and requested they keep it private. His old phone, now a relic of the past, was powered down. He then secured a small, furnished apartment across town, signing a 6-month lease. By the evening, the apartment was neatly organized, a reflection of his need to create order amid chaos. On Friday morning, Elliot met his lawyer at the courthouse, where he officially signed the divorce papers. After filing, the lawyer reminded him to have a witness present when serving Laura her copy, though no signature was required. Later that day, Elliot called Laura to arrange a meeting. They agreed to lunch at a restaurant they had often frequented during happier times. He arrived early, settling into a quiet table near the back. When Laura entered, she looked composed, wearing a carefully chosen outfit and carrying a duffel bag. "Elliot," she greeted warmly, leaning in as if to kiss him. He turned his cheek, her face falling at the subtle rejection. They sat across from each other, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. "I made a mistake," Laura began, her voice soft and imploring. "I want us to put this behind us and move forward." Elliot nodded, his tone measured. "I agree. It's time to move forward." When the waitress, Lynn, approached, Laura ordered 2 Diet Cokes. As she turned back, Elliot slid a manila envelope across the table. "These are the divorce papers," he said calmly. "Lynn is my witness that you've been served." Laura's face turned pale as she stared at the documents. Lynn returned with their drinks, her usual cheerful demeanor contrasting sharply with the tension at the table. "Elliot, please," Laura's voice trembled. "I made a mistake. Don't throw us away." Elliot's gaze was unyielding. "You already threw us away, Laura. On Sunday, you ruined everything." Tears welled in her eyes. "It was a mistake. I didn't think." Elliot's expression hardened. "Let me tell you what I see now, Laura. When I look at you, or when I close my eyes, I don't see the woman I loved. I see him. I hear you telling me how much better he is. That's what you've left me with." "Elliot, we can fix this," she pleaded, desperation lacing her words. "We can see a therapist." "No, Laura," he interrupted, his tone icy. "We can't. You showed me a side of yourself that destroyed the woman I loved. You killed her as surely as if you'd ripped her heart out. I don't want to divorce you, but I will. You left me no choice." Her face crumpled in anguish. "I won't accept this. I won't give up on us." Elliot's voice was low, his words deliberate. "On Sunday, you showed me a vicious, indifferent side of yourself. If you keep pushing, I'll show you a side of me you won't recognize." "What side is that?" she challenged, her voice breaking. "The side that's as cold and unyielding as you were that day," he replied. Her voice cracked, tears streaming down her face. "Elliot, this was a mistake." "No," he said firmly, his eyes cold. "It was deliberate. The only mistake was your reasoning. You acted out of revenge, Laura. You thought you were justified. But now, you'll have to live with the consequences." Her voice was barely a whisper. "What did you tell my parents?" Elliot leaned back, his expression unreadable. "I told them to talk to you. I'm done explaining myself." Laura looked down, unable to meet his gaze. The papers sat untouched between them. The finality of his decision hung in the air as Elliot stood, placing cash on the table for their drinks. "Goodbye, Laura," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. And with that, he walked away, leaving her alone with the weight of her choices. Elliot sat in the quiet of his attorney's office, a man resolute in his decision yet carrying the weight of betrayal. The world outside moved on, but for him, life had fractured irreparably. The betrayal hadn't just been an act, it had been a declaration. He had replayed the scene countless times in his mind, Laura's voice, her actions, the cold deliberation behind it all. He had loved her deeply, but love had limits, and Laura had crossed them. When Laura finally admitted to him that she had lied to her family, claiming he was having an affair, Elliot's jaw tightened, his patience wearing thin. "You never told them the truth?" he asked, his voice low but cold. Laura lowered her gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. "No." "Why not?" he demanded. She hesitated, shame flickering in her eyes. "They wouldn't understand. They wouldn't realize it was a mistake." Elliot's laugh was bitter. "A mistake. Maybe I'm finally getting it now." "I know what I did to you was wrong," Laura said, desperation creeping into her tone. "I made a horrible judgment. I know I hurt you deeply, but we can get past this. We can rebuild. We can. We can't." His interruption was sharp, cutting through her plea. "The woman I loved is gone. She no longer exists." Tears filled Laura's eyes, but defiance sparked beneath her sorrow. "I'll fight you every step of the way." Elliot leaned forward, his gaze steady and unyielding. "There's nothing to fight for. It's over. Don't make me reveal the other side of me, Laura. You won't like it." "You're bluffing," she shot back, though doubt lingered in her voice. "Don't push me," he warned, his voice icy. "Get a lawyer, have them review the petition, and contact mine if you have any questions. You'll be single soon enough, and then you can have all the Evan you want." "This has nothing to do with Evan." Laura snapped, anger rising. Elliot's tone softened slightly, a flicker of regret crossing his face. "Sorry. That was rude of me. I apologize. But I'm not leaving you. You already left me. The settlement is more than fair. Accept it and move on." "No way in hell," Laura hissed, her defiance unwavering. When the waitress, Lynn, returned with their food, Elliot handed her his credit card without touching his plate. As she brought back the receipt for him to sign, he rose to his feet. "Enjoy your meal, Laura," he said coldly. "I lost my appetite last Sunday when you spit on everything we had." With that, he walked away, leaving Laura alone at the table, her world unraveling further with every passing moment. By Tuesday, Laura had met with her attorney, Troy Barlow, a tough and highly recommended lawyer. Sitting across from him, she explained the situation as best she could. "My husband's trying to divorce me," she said, her voice heavy with frustration. "Has he served you with papers?" Troy asked, matter of fact. "Yes, last Friday." "May I see them?" Laura handed over the papers, and Troy skimmed the first page, his expression neutral but focused. "He's citing adultery. Is that true?" "No, it was a misunderstanding," Laura said defensively. Troy raised an eyebrow. "You had sex with someone other than your husband." "Correct." Laura hesitated, but eventually nodded. "Yes, but it was a mistake." Troy's tone remained steady, though his words were pointed. "Did your husband consent to this arrangement?" "Not specifically with this person," Laura admitted. "But he agreed to it as a retaliation if he cheated first." "So, you believed your husband was cheating, and you had revenge sex?" "Yes, but I found out later that he wasn't." Troy stared at her, incredulous. "Let me get this straight. Your husband wasn't cheating, but you still went through with revenge sex." I did," Laura said quietly. "That's adultery, Mrs. Marsh," Troy said flatly. "But I thought he was cheating," she protested. "What proof did you have?" "A friend told me," she explained, her voice faltering. "But apparently my friend was wrong." Troy sighed, his tone shifting to one of measured pragmatism. "So, based on hearsay, you made a decision that destroyed your marriage. Does your husband have proof of your actions?" "Yes," Laura said reluctantly. "I handcuffed him to a chair and made him watch." Troy's expression didn't falter, but his words were firm. "That's not just adultery. That's intentional and deeply damaging." "Is there a video?" Laura hesitated before nodding. "He gave me a copy." Troy leaned back, shaking his head. "I'll need to review the evidence and carefully go over the paperwork. But from what you've told me, this is an uphill battle. You've signed a solid prenuptial agreement, and your husband has every reason to push forward." Laura's voice cracked. "I don't want a payout. I don't want a divorce. I want my husband back." Troy looked at her, his tone softening slightly. "Then we'll suggest 6 weeks of counseling as a first step. If he refuses, we can fight for more." 2 days later, Elliot received a call from his lawyer. "They're requesting 6 weeks of counseling," his lawyer said. "What if I say no?" Elliot asked. "They'll fight harder, but you've got the upper hand. What do you want to do?" Elliot's voice was firm. "I'm not going to counseling. She killed any chance of that. Let's proceed." That evening, Elliot called Laura. "I'm giving up on counseling," he said, his tone resolute. "This is your last chance to accept the settlement and move on. If you don't, you'll see a side of me you won't like." Laura's voice broke. "Stop this madness and come home." "That's not going to happen." "Have it your way, Laura. I'm ready to fight." The fight escalated. Laura filed a countersuit. But by the end of the week, Elliot had taken another decisive step. The DVD had found its way to her parents, her sister, and even Evan's wife. The fallout was immediate. Jobs were lost, reputation shattered, and Laura's once carefully constructed world lay in ruins. For Elliot, there was no triumph, only the cold comfort of justice served. The love he had once cherished had been destroyed, and he would never look back. Elliot's resolve was unshaken as he explained the truth to his sister, Lila, over the phone. His voice carried the weight of betrayal and the clarity of a man who had seen more than he could bear. "She wasn't having an affair," Elliot began, his tone measured yet firm. "She got a call from a friend who told her I was." Without any proof, she believed it. This was her revenge. Lila hesitated, disbelief tinging her voice. "Elliot, Laura isn't stupid." "Well, ask her yourself," he replied sharply. "And when you do, let her know this. If she lets the divorce go through and stops fighting, it ends there. But if she keeps pushing, this is just the beginning. Can't you handle this differently? Lila asked, her voice tinged with concern. Have you watched the DVD? Elliot shot back, his tone cold. That's just the beginning, Lila. It's all I could stomach. There was a pause on the line. Finally, Lila spoke again. Elliot, after all of this, if Laura was willing to try and reconcile, would you? His voice softened, but only slightly. I might have, before. Not anymore. I still think you should at least try to work it out, she pressed. Lila, Elliot said, his voice heavy with emotion, you've known me since we were kids. You know I'm not a bad guy. Watch the DVD, and then tell me what you think. Lila sighed. Okay, I will. An hour later, Lila called back. Her voice was trembling, filled with regret. Oh, Elliot. I'm so sorry. I understand now. But I still need to talk to Laura. Let her know the terms haven't changed, Elliot said firmly. If she stops fighting, this ends here. If she doesn't, it only gets worse. I'll tell her, Lila promised. Later that day, Lila met Laura in person. After confirming the truth of Elliot's story, she passed on his warning. Laura, however, remained defiant, refusing to relent. Lila, now fully understanding the gravity of the situation, took the matter to Laura's parents. She explained everything, sparing no detail, and even handed over copies of the damning evidence. Laura's parents, devastated and ashamed, consulted a family friend and lawyer named Derek. After reviewing the documents and the prenuptial agreement, Derek advised Laura to do exactly as Elliot had suggested, quietly accept the divorce and let the matter end. But Laura, clinging stubbornly to her pride, refused. A week passed without any further word from Elliot's lawyer, but Elliot himself took the next step. On Sunday, Laura taught her usual Sunday school class at the church she had attended for years. But by that evening, every member of the women's auxiliary, along with the church ministers, had received an anonymous flyer in the mail. The flyer featured explicit photographs of Laura with a man who was not her husband, under the damning caption, "Should this woman be teaching your children on Sunday?" The fallout was swift and merciless. After the service, the pastor took Laura's parents aside for a private conversation. He handed them a formal letter for Laura, explaining that her services were no longer needed or welcomed at the church. Included with the letter was a copy of the flyer. When Laura received the letter, she broke down in tears, but even then, she refused to drop her countersuit. Her lawyer, Troy, explained that Elliot's actions, distributing the video and sending the flyers, were not illegal. The video, made by Laura herself, was Elliot's property, and he had every right to share it with other adults. The anonymous nature of the flyers made it impossible to trace them directly to him. Troy urged Laura to reconsider her stance, but she remained unmoved. Her family, however, begged her to relent, as the situation was now affecting their lives. Derek called Elliot personally to express his concerns, but Elliot was unmoved. Days later, the flyers reached Laura's neighbors and friends. This time, they were signed with her name and contact information. Harassment followed in waves. Her phone rang incessantly with obscene calls. Her email inbox flooded with hateful messages. Trash was dumped on her driveway, car, and lawn. Still, Laura refused to yield. Elliot escalated further. He began posting cryptic messages and insinuations on her social media accounts, which soon evolved into the sharing of blurred but unmistakable images. When Laura received an email from a pornographic website thanking her for the video, she knew the situation had spiraled beyond her control. The final blow came when a news crew arrived at her doorstep, cameras rolling. Faced with public humiliation and the complete destruction of her reputation, Laura called Troy and withdrew her countersuit. She requested a meeting with Elliot, which he agreed to on the condition that it be held at his attorney's office. When Laura arrived, she looked like a shadow of her former self. Her once vibrant demeanor was replaced by exhaustion. She had lost weight, and dark circles underlined her tired eyes. Elliot sat across from her, his expression unreadable. "I've dropped the countersuit," she said quietly. "You've won." Elliot's gaze remained steady, but his voice was heavy with sorrow. "No, Laura. I've lost. I lost the woman I loved. I lost my marriage. I lost everything that mattered to me." Laura's voice trembled as she replied, "There's a side of you I've never seen before. I'm sorry you had to see it, Elliot admitted softly. Tears streamed down Laura's face as she spoke. I don't know what to do now. I can't stay here. Everyone we've ever known looks at me like I'm diseased. I'll have to leave just to start over. We've both lost everything, Elliot said, his voice breaking. Haven't we? Yes, Laura whispered. We did. She stood up, her arms outstretched for one final embrace. Tears fell freely down her cheeks. But as Elliot took a step toward her, he stopped. I can't, Laura, he said, his voice cracking. I'd feel like I was cheating on the woman I loved. He turned away, heading for the door. With his hand on the handle, he paused and looked back at her. There's one thing you could do, he said softly. What's that? She asked, her voice barely audible. Just once, he said, his voice trembling. You could say you're sorry. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then, without waiting for a response, Elliot walked out of the office and out of her life forever.